Who met at least one new person during the break?
I did.
Well done. And please stand right in the blue shirt right in the middle. The one looking on both sides. Yes. What's your name and where are you from? Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful how when she spoke, almost everyone quieted down, but I still couldn't hear where Sarah was from. Oh, wonderful. Sarah from the city of West Sacramento. And who did you meet for the first time, Sarah?
I'm really bad at remembering names. But he's from Sac State, administrator with the college ranking area.
Excellent. Now hand your coffee or tea to your neighbor and stand up. Well done.
Yeah, well, that's
I'm thinking Joe Montana and Dwight Clark right there for those of us from that far back. It is such an honor to introduce someone who has made such a positive impact on our state through active transportation. She is now leading Caltrans' sustainability program, is a licensed civil engineer in California, and has a long history of successful advocacy for folks in our communities on active transportation. Will you please join me in thanking our moderator, who will introduce her panel, Jeannie Ward-Waller.
Hello, welcome everyone. There's really good energy in this room. I love this setup. It feels very intimate. So I'm glad we had a break because it's always hard to follow Tamika Butler. She's fabulous, and I think her skill is really in storytelling, and we need more of that in our community, telling the story about the people that we're serving and how valuable that is, and that personal story is really what should motivate all of us. So I'm thrilled to be here. As Carl said, I'm Jeannie Ward-Waller. I'm actually, at the moment, the acting district director up in District 2 in Reading for Caltrans. And I say that just because I have a couple of my colleagues from District 2 here, Tammy and Kendi. If you don't know them, you should. They're fabulous advocates for the program and supporting the North State. We are starting this symposium off with this panel. It's called What is Transformative? ? So I think it's meant to be a discussion amongst us today, and we're very lucky to have these fabulous speakers who are going to inspire you and particularly share projects that have been really transformative in their own communities. So we've got a good variety of projects to talk to you about today, and I'm just going to start with a little bit of a reflection on the program and kind of how we've gotten here. The Active Transportation Program was established in 2013 with the goal of creating this bigger state pot of funds for walking and bicycling projects, and consolidated several smaller programs: the Safe Routes to School program, the Bicycle Transportation Account, the Rails to Trails program, the Environmental Enhancement and Mitigation program, and the Federal Transportation Enhancement Funds. And all of these were kind of smaller pots of funds, but they had very passionate constituencies and communities that they served. And so I would say, initially it was a little bit of a controversial proposal, and I know because at the time I was working at the Safe Routes to School Partnership, and I was part of the fight initially against consolidating the programs, and ultimately came around to really being a supporter of it, along with a larger coalition of groups, because we really saw the transformative potential of having a bigger program, higher profile, that could potentially do more in our communities across the state. And so those groups, I no longer work for Safe Routes to School or California Bicycle Coalition, where I've spent my time in advocacy, but all of those groups have really become some of the biggest proponents of the Active Transportation Program, and were successful in getting an additional $100 million under Senate Bill 1 for the program, which nearly doubled it. So I think we're seeing the ability of this program to grow and to really fund transformative projects over time. And that's really the value, I think, of this great program. All right, so what is transformative? I want to start by putting that question to you. So we're going to use Slido. This is the part where we get interactive. So let me just make sure I know what to do here. And I think there's information in your packet about how to use Slido, but you can also just Google it. And the question is, whoops. Doing it right? Okay. So the code for this panel is R793, so I think you have to put that in. And then the question is, what does transformative mean to you? And ideally you use one or two words, but they should start popping up, and there they are. I'll give you a few seconds to figure it out. You're not supposed to be multitasking on email, remember, you're supposed to be answering the question. Great. Change. I see change a lot. Communities. Alternatives, innovation. A lot of people getting on their phones, so I'll give you another few seconds. Big, innovative, good innovations coming through for sure. I see equity in there, impactful,
Jeannie,
sharing
if
power.
the word is bigger, that means the more people are taking in, is that happening?
Great. Yeah, so more of you are using the same words. You are using the same words. That's what makes them bigger on the screen. So mode shift, evolution, innovation, definitely some key themes there that are resonating. All right. So I'm going to exit out of this. Okay. We will be using that again. So make sure you've downloaded it and have it on your phone. We'll come back to it. Get back to my slides. Okay. All right, so I think transformative can mean many things, which is part of why we put it to you as a question. It really depends on the context and the community's vision. And this is a picture of Ciclovia, which those of you from Southern California are probably very familiar with. But I think Ciclovia is an example of how you can have an incredibly transformative event for active transportation without any infrastructure, without any concrete. So transformative can go well beyond what we think about when we think traditionally of projects. But we do often first think of big projects, big innovative projects. This is a new bike ped overcrossing that just opened in East Palo Alto that reconnected the community. This community was divided by Highway 101, and there's housing on one side, and there's parks and schools and churches on the other. And this community has really been reconnected and transformed truly by this project funded by ATP and Cycle One. Here's another project. This is a shameless plug for good work by Caltrans. This is in Tahoe and Kings Beach, and this was a major road diet, roundabouts, lots of infrastructure added, but truly transformed the downtown. And this was done in strong partnership with the community because the concern was about slowing down traffic in this really congested tourist area. And they put in a lot of traffic calming on the side streets to ensure that there wasn't detrimental effects on some of the side streets in this neighborhood. This is a project some of you may recognize. This is O Street in Sacramento. This is an example of a really cost-effective, low-cost transformative project. This was done with SB1 funds, another shameless plug for SB1, as part of a resurfacing project. So this is an example of how a few $1,000s can really transform the bicycling environment. Sometimes the most basic projects can be transformative. This was kind of the message behind the Safe Routes to School program, is that sometimes just a crossing or a stop sign can be transformative for the kids trying to get to school where there's a dangerous intersection or a particular issue. And as with Ciclovia, you often don't need concrete and asphalt to be transformative. This is a Walk to School Day in South Sacramento, part of a Walk to School or Safe Routes to School program. And you could see by the smiling faces of the kids that this is really transformative to the children and families in this neighborhood. So I challenge us, all of us, to keep our vision of transformative projects centered on the communities that we serve. I think that was one of my big takeaways from Tamika's talk, is that it's about the people and the users, and they are the experts of what they need and what's transformative to them. It shouldn't be, transformative shouldn't be defined by the engineers or the planner's vision, but by the communities and the individuals that will be using it, and especially the smallest ones that are the future users of those projects. All right, so with that, I'm going to introduce my panel, and they're each going to give you a case study of a project in their community. And we are going to start with Jessica Zank. All right. Jessica Zank is Deputy Director for the San Jose Department of Transportation. Her full bio is in your packet, but I just wanted to highlight she's an urban planner with expertise in economic development, transportation, redevelopment, and the arts. She has a master's in city planning from UC Berkeley and a bachelor's degree from Brown University. Go Bruno. I'm advancing your slides. Are you going to do it?
Oh, okay. So me first. All right. So thank you, everybody, and especially to the CTC staff for bringing us here. Today I'm going to talk about the Better Bikeways project, which is an ongoing effort to remake streets throughout the core of San Jose, and particularly the story enabled by the Active Transportation Program to further add to the core of this system, San Fernando Street, around it. This project, the Better Bikeways project, really starts with a story of partnerships. It began when the Knight Foundation and NACDO teamed up with us at the city to say, how about we take existing bikeways, Class 2 bikeways on some pretty fast streets, and make them into better bikeways that are truly accessible for people of all ages and abilities. We said, sure, sounds great, and we added a bunch of other partners to that effort as one of the first things we did when we started in 2017 with the engagement and design of this idea. We're thrilled that the CTC, with the last round of Active Transportation Program funds, has joined that list of partners with a significant grant for that San Fernando corridor. So this is the story of taking, those regular downtown streets, some of which are one-way couplets, quickly with paint and plastic, seeing what we can do to make them much safer very quickly, in a year and a half for the first 10 miles that we've done. And then, with the help of partners like the CTC, make them into the permanent, full hardscape type of infrastructure that we were inspired by here in Chicago a couple years ago when we started this project. So why is this transformative? That's what we're really challenged to talk about today, and I'm very cognizant of our time. So I'll just leave you with the 5 things that I think are transformative about this project in this context. The first is that San Jose is a big city. Okay? San Jose is 1 million people and 176 square miles, so very large. We typically are thought of as being pretty spread out, but actually central San Jose, the part centered around the downtown, about 4 square miles, or not 4 square miles, but 4 miles in and out of downtown, about 49 square miles. That has about half of our population and more than half of our employment. So that's really the core of the city. And that core, and especially the downtown, is really, really growing. We have about 20,000 people living in downtown today, and that is going to grow by more than 5,000 before the end of next year, given housing that is under construction today, and we expect that to keep on growing pretty rapidly. The employment is going to more than double with the items that are in the pipeline at the city right now, from about 43,000, so relatively small employment base today for a city of 1 million, but to 90,000 plus. So we're really thinking about these new people and the new habits that they can create if we set the right framework for them to do so. We're also looking at transformative investment in San Jose. Over the next 10 years, we're going to see roughly $10 billion of investment into this core area through the BART Silicon Valley extension with the subway right into the heart of this, with high-speed rail, with Caltrain, which is electrifying its system today and growing that system with a really wonderful service vision, as well as continued growth and expansion of ACE and the Capitol Corridor. So these feed right into our central station, which is Diridon Station, which is at the western end of this network. This is giving us a new reason to double down on something that we haven't thought a lot about in San Jose, which is space efficiency, right? How do we move a lot more people in the space that we have today without incurring gridlock? And how do we also really think about the affordability and long-term sustainability of that system? So we're really looking to move people much differently. Third thing that makes this transformative is designing it as a network, which is something that we're able to do by using the paint and plastic approach, much like Sacramento here. Building on the back of SB1 measures B and T, which are regional and local measures. Those are repaving these streets, and then we're adding the paint and plastic, primarily using TDA 3 funds. So we've been able to do all of the orange within the last year and a half, and the purple is coming within the next 2 years. Another 7 miles. And then the civil improvements we expect to be in the ground by 2022. The fourth thing that's really transformative is this method of going from demonstration. We did a 1-week pilot, pop-up, to pilot and quick build with this interim design, learning what works and what doesn't work, and then going to permanent installation with the funding from the CTC. And last but not least, the other thing that is allowing this to be a transformative moment with this project is the fact that we're seeing a whole new set of demand, right? Whether it's those skateboards that are electric, scooters, electric scooters, it's not just bikes that are occupying these micro-mobility lanes, and that's really increasing our demand. So that is my time, and so I'll just leave you with these pictures and pass it back over to Jeannie.
Jessica. All right, next up we've got Rudy Mendoza. Rudy Mendoza is a native of Woodlake in Tulare County. He was elected to City Council in 2018 and served as mayor for the last 7 years. He chairs the San Joaquin Valley Regional Policy Council and is executive director of CALA. Yes. All right, I'll turn over to Rudy.
Good morning. See if I can figure out how to work this thing. I'm not as technologically savvy, but I did a presentation at my local high school on Friday, and this is the first slide that came up. I used this presentation. I'll be honest, it was a primer with a bunch of kids. But the reason why I put this slide up is when I got elected to serve on city council back in 2008, I really had no idea that I would be serving this long, let alone working on transportation. But my overall goal was basically to do just that, and that was to put the town of Woodlake, California on the map. So whether you're from Southern California or up north, we want you to know where Woodlake is because we believe it is a jewel of the Central San Joaquin Valley. We are a population under 10,000. If you can look at some of these figures up here, it talks about our median household income being right under $33,000 a year. We are population under 10,000. We don't have a lot of land. We don't take up a lot of land. We're, I believe, right under 3 square miles, if that slide, if I can read that correctly. But we're primarily a ag town. I was sharing with Tamika that just picture Nebraska, only the difference is instead of corn, we have oranges. Instead of a lot of white people, we have a lot of Hispanic people. So that's what makes us a little bit different. But we sit on the eastern stretch of Tulare County. And for those of you that are not familiar with the area, we are on the way to Sequoia National Forest. So that is my backyard. I literally wake up every morning on a clear day when there isn't any smoke in the sky, and I can see the Sequoia National Forest from my house. That is my backyard. This slide here is our transit center. This transit center, what is so important about this is before it was a transit center, it used to be a parking lot. So when the carnival came to town, this is where they used to park. Since 2008, we have serviced over 200,000 riderships in the city of Woodlake out of this little transit center. 200,000 riderships since 2008. Here is what the transit center used to look like on the left. Like I said, it was a dirt lot. And if you can picture that full of carny trucks and SUVs and buses and, you know, kind of the Muppet mobile, that's what it was full of. But we decided we were going to build a transit center, and this slide on the right is a nice one, but it's not as nice as this one there. This is our roundabout project. If you look at the slide on the left, we had a four-corner intersection. By the way, Woodlake doesn't have any signal lights, but we have a four-corner intersection here. It is actually a bisection of two state highways, 216 and 245. We, at one point, used to have the railroad that go through town, and it would cut across from east to west on this intersection. But the slide on the right represents our roundabout. It was actually the first roundabout in our district, District 6. And, we couldn't put some fancy statue in the center. The best we could do was a nice little metal sign of the city of Woodlake there. But I remember people would always give us a hard time about wanting to build roundabouts, and, the biggest concern was how many accidents were we going to have. And I thought I'd get creative, and I told everybody, look, if you behave every time you go a roundabout, you get a free ticket to go again. So that actually worked rather well. This right here is a parking lot on the left-hand side that was right in the middle of our busy downtown. I say that tongue-in-cheek because we really weren't that busy, but the sign on the right, that is now, instead of a parking lot, it is what we call the paseo. It's part of our walkable communities-inspired theme, and people actually can go through there and, walk, sit on the benches, enjoy a nice quiet picnic. And the murals on the left are part of our mural project, which we took to doing a couple of years ago. This is our downtown. You'll notice the bike lanes. We actually get quite a bit of use out of those bike lanes. This one is near and dear to my heart, and that is because a lot of our kids would walk into town from the outskirts of town to get to school on these dirt roads, and that was my passion. That is what got me started on serving on the council, and that was to try to bring projects like this to fruition, to make it safer, through safe routes to schools, through added infrastructure, bike lanes, sidewalks, et cetera, and that is what's represented there on the right. And by the way, we did get rid of 150-year-old palm trees, but hey, all in the name of progress. This is our community center. The lot on the left is barren, but at one time it used to house what was referred to as the Adobe houses. That community center is our linchpin in our Parks and Recs program, which we kicked off in July of 2018. We now service over 1,000 kids in the last year and a half in all manner of sports. I'd love to talk to you more about it, but do me a favor, since we're out of time, I want you to go through on your phone and look up cityofwoodlake.com, and you're going to learn a lot more about Woodlake. Thank you. Do they have a clicker? Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Is it working
How
now?
do you do, you push that button?
All right.
I know, I saw you struggle.
Thanks, Rudy. We'll all have to come visit Woodlake. All right, next up is Marcella Clem. Marcella is the Executive Director of the Humboldt County Association of Governments, rural county that has been awarded active transportation program grants in every cycle. Fabulous. Marcella has a Bachelor of Arts in Communication from UCSD and a Master of Science from Humboldt State. All right, Marcella.
Thank you, it's a pleasure being here. I'd like to start saying that I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a spokesman for all of our partners in the region. And that is not only the cities and the county, it's our public community outreach organizations, our Trails Council, and even Caltrans. So, oh, I don't know if this is mine. Oh, this is me. So in thinking about a transformative project, I focused on what gets people out of their cars, mode shift, and I thought about myself. And these were the scripts in my head that kept me from getting a bike for 3 years. I moved 1.8 miles from my work, and it took me 3 years to buy a bicycle. So I really did think that 20 gears were too many gears on a bike. I thought I was too out of shape to even do it, and I guess you can read all this. I thought this would maybe be a good time to do a polling on if you haven't shifted your mode, what are the scripts in your head why you're not doing it? And if you do, what do you think are those scripts in your friends and loved ones for not doing it? And I'm scared about my 5 minutes, so let's try to do it quick. This counts.
Okay, sorry, folks.
Oh, that's awesome.
For those who do not use active transportation, why not? For those who do, what do you think keeps friends and family from walking and biking more?
I'm going to want a copy of this when this is over to help us for our next cycle.
We'll save it.
It's true.
Lack of incentive.
Helmet hair.
I think e-bikes solve a lot of these problems. All right, we'll give you a few more seconds. This doesn't take away from her time, because this is the interactive part. Okay, good.
Thank you, Teresa. She keeps me in line.
All right, we'll switch back, Marcella. I can do it.
Okay, so I did change my scripts. You know, I'm not too old. They make a bike with 10 gears and fat tires and a step through. It was perfect for me. I'm halfway to getting in shape. I'd like to tell you all that my body mass index transformed, and it hasn't. But it hasn't increased. And then when you're 50, going on 55, it's a good thing that it's not increasing. So you hear sometimes that a highway is the main street of a community. So this is the city of Eureka. The Highway 101 bisects the entire city, and it's not just 2 lane miles. So we have 6 lane miles you would have to cross. So you can see the pictures with the red outlines. There's no bike facilities. There's a sidewalk and signals. And looking over on the right is one of our projects that has been built. It's the Eureka Waterfront Trail. We now go under the highway. It's the only safe highway crossing throughout the entire city. This is an overall picture of part of the Humboldt Bay Trail. The segments you see colored, those are completed and in action. We have the final 4 that was just awarded as a transformative project in the last cycle. So that's our final 4 miles of the Humboldt Bay Trail. And I will say that some of these segments were completed before the active transportation program, but very scarcely and in isolated segments. So the active transportation program has really helped our area with this. This is the crossing of one of the Eureka Slough bridges, and I do give it to Caltrans for putting in the red-colored asphalt. It was something the community asked for. It hadn't been done in the district. I still wouldn't ride this, going over this bridge. Another aspect of what's going to be transformative in our upcoming project is we have a rail corridor that the rail service is no longer there, but we do have some tourist rail industries. So as a compromise and through a lot of meetings, we are going to transform the existing rail bridge to something like the one that you see here on the right. That's supposedly in Chicago. Our Bay Trail project, the final 4, in addition to about 4 miles to the north that is already built, is it's connected to our big highway project. So This is our safety corridor, 50 miles an hour. There's 6 uncontrolled intersections, a history of accidents. We are going to be closing all of the intersections except for one underpass here and a half signal a little further to the south. But the question of the bike and ped component, the Caltrans solution was the red pigment, and that was not acceptable to the community or to the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission solution was to put a barrier on the highway so there would be no more shoulder for the vehicles, and if people were brave enough, they could ride their bikes on the highway. But the picture to the right is what we are planning. So the Humboldt Bay Trail will be a separated bike and ped facility that I will ride. I will not ride that other one. This is existing conditions. I thought everyone would like to see that. And then a before and after. So on the left is what it looks like now, and we will have a cute little bridge there. Some components to how things become transformative is really the partnerships. Happy Trails is a radio program that every week focuses on trails. The Redwood Community Action Agency has worked on every single trail project. They assist with getting the public involved and getting their voice heard. We have a Trails Council that have volunteers. Certainly the cities, Caltrans has been a partner, the Coastal Commission. All of those plans is something that not only HCOG does and funds, but the Redwood Community Action Agency were actually the first to do the planning documents in the late 90s. And then some of our cities will build outside of their jurisdiction, so that was a big thing. And I'll just leave that. This is our history. And I am very happy and surprised to say that the region over the last 4 years came up with $13 million in local match funds, which I would have thought, where would we ever get that? But everyone scrapes and asks and made it a successful project. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. All right. Grecia Elenis is our final speaker on the panel. She's a senior policy advocate at Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. She is a native of Fresno County and is working in that community now. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science from UC Berkeley in Environmental Science, and she also worked at DWR before coming to Leadership Council. Go ahead, Grecia.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Again, Grecia Lenes. So just as a quick overview for those unfamiliar with our organization, we do advocacy alongside communities and directly in partnership with the priorities that folks elevate throughout the Central Valley and the Eastern Coachella Valley, and primarily rural unincorporated communities. But today, I'm mostly going to be talking about the work that we've done in partnership with in the city of Fresno. And I apologize in advance. I was out of town last week and didn't get to put some pretty pictures because I know they very much help. So, but hopefully I can paint that picture for you all. So I'm really going to talk about kind of some of the transformative projects, as was mentioned earlier. You know, they don't have to be these large sums of money. They can be a simple painting a bike lane or just adding, you know, a crosswalk that really transform the community. But it's the community advocacy, the community power behind it. And I saw it when we did the kind of interactive activity earlier that, you know, some of the keywords that I saw up there was, you know, in addition to change, innovation, was power sharing. And so how is it that we can ensure that communities are at the forefront and really leading the decisions of what will transform the community? And so we've been working for years now. So our organization is only about 6.5 years old now. And so since then, we've been working in the city of Fresno, primarily in the southeast region, West Fresno, and then another community called the Adams area, which for those familiar, it's right off of Highway 99. It's a very poorly planned elementary school that's literally 100 feet from the freeway on-ramp. And so in partnership in specifically this neighborhood, this area, though, has been incorporated into the city for years now. There are no sidewalks around it. The only sidewalks are really just immediately in front of the school, like on the school property, but nothing that gets the kids to and from that school safely. So as the council member was showing in Woodlake, the dirt trails or the dirt paths, that was a reality for kids to this day, actually. And after years of advocacy from the community and partnerships with other organizations, with local jurisdictions, and with the state agencies, the city has finally committed funding to finally get those sidewalks paved. Because as we mentioned, when the rare times it does rain in the valley, it pours and you get these floodings in the streets that is not conducive for any type of walking. And so you have elementary school children walking to this site, and not only elementary school kids, but this site also picks up four other buses come and picks up kids here that takes them to their nearby middle school and the high school that they have to go to. So this was an advocacy effort that the community has been pushing for years, that is going to finally bring sidewalks to the community, is finally bringing proper curb and gutter in their neighborhood, and most importantly, a hawk system that will actually facilitate crossing where, just last year, within the first semester, there was 2 accidents that happened in the community where kids were just going back and forth, and it was, they were in their crosswalk, but it was the cars that, just for whatever reason, not paying attention. And so even this project has a total cost amount of about $2.5 million, $3 million. And though it's, so some may be substantial to the city and to this community, it's very substantial to others. I know there's some multi-million, $10+ million projects, but this is something that's going to create that transformation in a neighborhood that currently does not have safe access to sidewalks. And this advocacy has also facilitated other advocacy that communities in the same city have done in Southeast Fresno, where, again, safe routes to school is a huge, huge priority, and just even getting a sidewalk painted a crosswalk painted has been kind of a lot of effort from the community and really flexing their power. And so the city has in partnership been working with us to finally, or just this last year, actually finally committed to doing 2 separate crosswalks that lead to this community and that actually connect 2 different communities or 2 different areas where the kids from one neighborhood can finally go to their middle school over here without having to worry about the 40-mile-an-hour traffic going through the local streets. And so kind of the leverage. Folks have really leveraged their own contacts with each other and pushing forward. And now we're getting to the point where the city is reaching out and being like, hey, how does, we've heard this issue before because we do invite them to, or folks or the communities we work with do invite them to the meetings. And so we've heard this issue before, we want to apply for this grant. And just recently, a couple weeks ago, I got an email from our local grant writer saying like, hey, we want to apply for these funds for this sidewalk. And it was the exact same sidewalks that folks had been pushing for again, years. And so I think the point I want to ultimately make is, really the partnerships, as was mentioned, with not just, your own silos of government agencies or your own nonprofits or state agencies, but really working together, because that is the only way to really push the needle forward, and having community lead that effort, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to know what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and they're the ones who are going to be using it and hopefully reap the benefits that will come with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gracia. Can we get one more round of applause for all the speakers? All right, I think we're going to do another interactive poll just to kind of get your juices going and get you ready to ask some questions of our panelists. The last one is specific to all the projects that were just shared. Which of these case studies, which of these communities is maybe most similar to the area that you're working in? Lots of urban folks today.
Oh, wow. I thought.
That's okay, because it leads right into my discussion.
All All right, while you're answering, I want to maybe tee up the discussion to our panelists with the first question. Grecia, you obviously talked about really deep partnership with the community members and across agencies, and I want to give each of you a chance to talk a little bit more about how you engage the community, and I think particularly with the focus of ATP, how disadvantaged residents are engaged in your projects and your planning processes. Anybody want to start? Jessica?
I'll start. We can go to it later if it's helpful, because we stuck in a slide about kind of the engagement process that we went through around this project, which is, one of the more extensive engagement processes that the city of San Jose has done, probably on par with, like our general plan, and things like that, because we sent flyers, postcards, just to make sure everybody was being reached, to more than 10,000 people. We went to and/or hosted more than 30 meetings, and just to stop with that for a sec, we ended up with 7 community meetings that we put on, but we found it was much more effective and important when we went to the meetings that were already happening. So we did a lot of neighborhood meetings in people's living rooms where the community associations were already meeting, they were coming together. We got 10 to 15 minutes on their agenda with some help from the Bike Coalition locally, the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition. So we, with the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition, went to a lot of those with us, so that we really kind of were meeting with people early on in the process in a place where they were already going, right? They didn't have to learn about it and come to our meeting. We also went to like every festival that we could for about, a year, and we're continuing to do that, do some pop-ups on the sidewalks, that we could do intercept surveys, as well as the bikeway pop-up that we did. We did 2 different surveys, one that was in person. I think Lola might have helped with that one. She's right there in the audience. And then we also did an online survey with help from the Knight Foundation, helping us like promote that and ask really what do people care about in terms of what this project could do. And probably unsurprisingly, the results were all about safety. And so, that was the biggest thing on people's mind, and that was really important for us to think about as we designed the project. So that was kind of the public outreach side of it, and also did a lot of internal engagement with other departments and other agencies, especially our transit agency. So those are both good.
Thank you.
Do we have any elected officials in the room? If you do, please raise your hand. I promise you won't get shot. So if you've ever worked with me on transportation issues, as I mentioned before, I chair the San Joaquin Valley Policy Council, where that's all we talk about. I'm a straight shooter, and when I come up to Sacramento, it's always frustrating because we want to get to the point, we want to talk about the value of projects. And I really appreciated seeing those numbers, because that leads me right into why I'm here. We don't spend a lot of time in my community convincing my community of the value of our projects, because it would be preaching to the choir. A couple things that you don't know behind the scenes of what the impact or the intrinsic value of these projects that I showed up on the slides are that we're in a much better position today than we were 10 years ago when we started going down this path. We had absolutely no growth. As a matter of fact, we were dying on the vine, so to speak. We had stagnant growth. We had no available housing stock. We had a multi-million-dollar budget deficit in the community of Woodlake, and it was one of the most crime-ridden communities in Tulare County in terms of gang violence and juvenile delinquency. Today, fast forward, after all of these projects, and this is part of what I do, is I go around and I try to get people to think about transportation as a whole, as what are the other attributes in the intrinsic value. I can tell you that today, we're actually one of the lowest crime rate cities in the county of Tulare. Some of our crime areas have significantly decreased as much as 300% in some areas. Our budget deficit has gone away. We're now able to not only pay our bills, but put money away for a rainy day. We've attracted our 7th national retail chain to the community of Woodlake, community under 10,000. Our property values have actually increased by 59% compared to 40%, 23%, and 17% in our surrounding communities. Some of those communities probably don't like that very much. We now have embarked on multiple housing projects where we are looking at a potential of 300 brand-new units in a community that hasn't seen any available housing stock in decades. 20% of that is part of the affordable housing requirements, but believe me, we have sufficient affordable housing. What we have a lack of is market rate housing, and we have a community that is thriving and is able to afford that. What all of these new businesses and people coming into town tell us why they made the decision to do so is because of our growth, our ability to get out from under financial ruin and embark on multiple projects that have made the city cleaner, safer, more attractive to do business in, as opposed to living in some of the major metro areas in the surrounding neighborhoods. So again, one of the things that I do is I go around getting not only elected officials, but also planners, engineers. You start thinking about transportation projects as much more than just building a road or a bridge. It's about the value that it brings to your community. It has literally taken us from the brink of bankruptcy and crime-infested neighborhoods to one of the most beautiful, most remarkable cities in Tulare County today. And it is wholly in part by transportation projects that are supported by that very same community that I don't have to preach to. So please, let's change our way of thinking about projects and think about them as what other values they bring to our communities. So shameless pitch, go to cityofwoodlake.com, learn more about us, and I'd be more than happy to take you on a tour if you ever come by.
If there's anything we learn, it's visit Woodlake. All right, so many of you have figured out we've switched it to Q&A mode on Slido, so you're welcome to use that same code and enter your questions. You can also vote for questions, so if somebody has already asked a question that you wanted to ask or that you really want to hear the answer to, you can vote, and we'll take some of those questions that rise to the top. We can also open the floor if you want to ask your question live. Feel free to raise your hand, and we will, I think, send a mic around so we can capture those. All right, so it looks like the top vote getter and growing is many people in this room have been involved in reviewing ATP applications. How can one know by reading an application which projects will be transformative? Panelists, do you have thoughts on that?
I haven't done that. Well, I'll just say that I volunteered the first round. That was the last round I volunteered for. It's very time consuming. And that was before we had points for transformative projects. But I know our region was successful in the state program. And my slides really did focus on that. It required a lot of public input. The public needed to be behind it. Not only the city building it or the jurisdiction building it, but the connecting cities had to be a part of it. Elected officials for probably over 10 years or more had to support it. Those support letters do count. And when I did review applications, if it was a form support letter, it didn't have as much weight. So that's one suggestion I would have to make it unique.
The thoughts, Jessica?
Yeah, I think that one of the things about Transformative, maybe two quick points. One of them is that projects that have the ability to open up new opportunity and new area because they provide, whether it's that that missing link or that actual physical gap in safe crossings and things like that. I think those are the ones that allow people to create those kind of new habits, new patterns, new way of thinking about and getting around their community. But I would also offer that, for transformative work and projects, we should probably also be thinking about the level of investment in this work. I had the opportunity to go to Copenhagen this past year for the first time, and I was struck by the fact that the city of Copenhagen invested $200 million over the 10 years roughly between 2005 and 2015 in their active transportation infrastructure. And then every year since that was completed, they estimate that they're getting 300 million back in benefits and in savings from that infrastructure, from the, it costs less to maintain than roadway and transit infrastructure, and it also brings health benefits to the whole community. And so I think, the transformative let me just say, it does require some transformative amounts of money to really get where we're trying to go.
I would just add that really when you're looking at these applications, kind of like in the support that you're seeing and the partnerships, the wide array of partnerships. So making sure that, you have buy-in from, again, not just like your local government agencies, so whether it's the COG, the county, and the city all support this program, but no, like how, are you crossing, these lines of like, okay, you're going into nonprofits, you're talking to labor unions, you're talking to, just informal community groups that just like by themselves are organizing themselves, where it's just like, hey, 10, 20 people meet on a regular basis. Like, are they part of that conversation? And so really seeing where those support letters are coming from. And I think, the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, there's been a few projects that actually submit, whether it's like in a petition form where there's your form letter, but everyone signs it and it's in their native language, or whether people are actually taking the time and writing just a paragraph in handwritten form, like seeing that support, I think really goes to show that, hey, people have, are not only like informed about this, but they're actually supporting and they really, really want this and they need this. So seeing that, and I think one thing that is, I commend you all, actually, first of all, I should have started off with that. I commend everyone who has been part of that process, because I can't even imagine the extent of work and really trying to figure out, is this project going to be transformative? Because, you can be a very good grant writer and just be able to wordsmith your way into, saying that in one way or another, it's supposed to benefit a disadvantaged community, and start using census tracts, even though that part of the project is not even proposed to be completed until 10 years from now or something like that. And we've seen applications do that. And so how is it that we are going to hold them accountable? And I think that's where, if you yourself hopefully know the jurisdiction or the geographic area, then you can kind of put yourself in that, on the ground and realize, okay, this trail line actually is nowhere near that disadvantaged community that it says it's supposed to benefit, so maybe it's not the best project. But when you actually start seeing, again, those letters from communities, those letters from informal groups, from formal groups, that's, I think, when you start to really see that. But I think it's a very complicated, I can't say it's like this is a one way, because there's no one solution to saying like this is going to be a great transformative project, because you may or may not just not have a great grant writer, and you may or may not just not have the capacity. But when you have like the community support behind it, and that's why I emphasize partnerships, because obviously local jurisdictions cannot do it all. Really moving that needle, but focusing on, I think, on the diversity of supporters and the letters that you're getting and the quality of the letters.
Folks, change the way you think about projects. Look, I'm not a salesman by nature. I really am not. But I'm very passionate about my community and the value that these projects have brought forth to my community. And so therefore, every time I get an opportunity to talk to somebody about it, I paint them a picture with numbers. And I'm the first one to invite folks to come to the Central Valley, specifically to come visit communities like Woodlake, to actually see what these projects and how they have impacted us. But remember, the folks that are looking at these applications, they're looking at stuff on paper. And unless you're painting that picture, unless you're passionate about how it's bringing value to your communities, how a simple $500,000 project or $2 million project in a community under 10,000 has now increased property values by almost 60% over 10 years, you have to figure out how to paint that picture. Otherwise, you're relying on, and no offense intended to my engineer friends, but a lot of these guys are geeks and they don't understand the value. So we all have to be better salespeople. We all have to paint that picture of how a good ATP project is going to benefit a community. And like I said, come visit us and we'll show you specifically how they have changes over the course of 10 years. And we have had multiple.
One more thing? Yeah.
Yeah, can I add one more thing? One thing that was unique to our last grant application is a trail fund was established. People in the community have put money into this. We have $300,000, which is a lot for our community, specifically for the Bay Trail. So I think when a reviewer sees that people are actually giving their own money to make this happen, it has a big impact.
Thank you. I know we're not just focusing on the scoring process or the application process for the program today. We're talking more generally about active transportation and its transformative nature. So there's two questions that are rising to the top here, and I'm going to invite the speakers to comment on either, since I think the first one is kind of a challenging one. They're both interesting, though. So the first one is, how do you balance transformative projects with the rising cost of housing and displacement issues? And the second one is, do you have examples of transformative non-infrastructure? So pick one of those and respond. And then I'm happy to invite questions from the audience too. So if you have questions that you want to ask yourself rather than putting up on Slido, go to that next. Thoughts?
So in, I believe, most of California, but definitely in San Jose, transportation is the second largest cost for basically all families. In San Jose, families are typically paying about 15% of their household income into transportation costs. So I think one of the things that we think about when we're thinking about these different types of transportation costs is, how do we take that whole, amount of money that's available to a family and free up as much of that 15% as we can, so that housing is extraordinarily expensive in San Jose, and we're trying, a variety of techniques to see if we can address that both on the supply side and the affordability side. And what we can do in transportation is hopefully, first of all, understand that sometimes that bike lane may actually, or may simply be perceived, or some combination of the two, be seen as changing the character of a community and maybe inviting people in ways that displace the existing residents. First of all, we have to admit that that can happen. And think about that when we're designing a project. Where should it go? How should it go? Should it actually be a lane? Should it affect the parking along the street or not? Those are some of the things that we're asking ourselves more than we were in the past, because so that's important. I think Tamika brought that up, and we're trying to do that. But then also ask, what's facing this household as a whole? What is their affordability burden? And how is that housing and transportation? Could they walk if they felt safer? Could they bike, et cetera? And the last thing is that some of these projects, the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities grant program was brought up. And I think that that's another opportunity to really look at not how do we do work in silos, but how do we bring work together that the state, is offering. So we found that very valuable to get our housing and transportation colleagues to work much more together for sustainability overall.
I'll just say that you might want to visit Woodlake, but you should move to Humboldt, because a median household income is only $250,000. So we do have our struggles as well. The rents are high. So in thinking of transformative projects, people's money is tight. If they don't have a vehicle, a transformative project can widen their areas to get to work. So that's all I have to say about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just add very as briefly as I can, that, the displacement issue is widely seen as an issue that the coastal regions only experience. However, more and more, I think we're seeing, and we're getting much more data now, that the inland regions, the Central Valley is experiencing this as well underway and becoming, the next, San Francisco, having the level of displacement as like the next San Francisco and LA areas where, given that we have the highest population growth, tentative population growth in the coming decades, we really need to be much more proactive. So my answer to this question is local jurisdictions just simply need to be much more proactive and recognize that housing in the Central Valley is not as affordable as one thinks it is. The Cal Enviro Screen score does a great job of highlighting that, because as soon as it was added, like, for example, the city of Fresno stayed at the very top of that Cal Barrio screen score, and not in a good way. And so we recognize that, there is a housing stock issue, there is a cost issue, but at the same time, there's a quality issue in the communities in the Central Valley where we have to kind of be much more creative. And as we're investing, whether it's just, a few $100,000s or tens of millions of dollars in a community, we have to recognize the potential of displacement in vulnerable populations, especially if local jurisdictions do not have any policies in place to protect those same residents or programs. So I think this just takes self-initiative of local decision makers, policymakers to really be at the forefront and not replicate what we've seen in the coastal regions.
If you would have asked me yesterday about displacement issues, I thought maybe you were wondering if my wife was going to allow me to come home tonight, because that's what I thought it was. But, to be honest with you, to echo the sentiments, we don't have that problem. Our problem has been that, we're a community that for a long time had no growth and nobody had the vision. And so we definitely had a lot of folks who were looking for an available housing stock in the community, so much so that we had a list of people that were pre-qualified to buy homes. They just weren't any available. And so we decided to put some infrastructure projects in that allowed investors to come in and take another look at Woodlake, say, you know what, this might be a good community. It's clean, it's safe community, it's affordable, there's plenty of land available and water is available, which is something that we probably don't talk about enough, and that's water availability. But that has led to now where we are in the midst of almost 300 units of available housing that's going to be available over the next year and a half to 2 years. And so, again, we don't have that problem with displacement. What we had a problem with is just not enough housing available for people that are willing to pay $250,000 to $300,000. So if you have $1 million property in the Bay Area and you're looking for a place to live, cityofwoodlake.com, where it's a quarter of the price. But to me, that's what I'm thinking of, and those are the things that we are doing to become an attractive place to live. We're making it easier for folks to find available housing. And, if you're wondering about, is it all market rate? No, like I said, we have the affordable housing component taken care of. It's the market rate that we have a need for.
Any questions from the audience? Anyone want to ask a question? Chris? And one in the back, yeah.
Chris Morphus, good morning. I could empathize with Tamika's fuzziness earlier this morning about the nature of today's program. And one of the disconnects is that the ATP in and of itself is perhaps not even capable of achieving some of the transformations we'd like to see, as opposed to things like in tandem with congestion pricing or increasing the availability of auxiliary dwelling units or banning right turn on red, for example. So we might think about somehow linking or incentivizing ATP grants with broader policies that would help us achieve the transformations we'd like. Those are tricky. The second thing, it was just earlier seeing Carl and Tamika up on stage. I was reminded by Carl and his Silicon Valley affiliation that in that regard, in terms of business or technological innovation, California really is a global leader. And Tamika reminds us that in its attempt to create a multicultural, multi-ethnic democracy, California is very, very important. The world doesn't have much experience with that sort of thing. On this particular topic, that of walking and bicycling, California, perhaps Davis, the 1950s and 60s, was an important historical global example. But other than that, California is not so much of a leader. And so if we're going to address topics of transformation, we'll want to do as Jessica did and perhaps look abroad to places like Barcelona and its super blocks, or Sevilla and Bogota with some of their rapid bikeway developments and some of those effects. There are some places from around the world that have achieved some transformations, and we'll have to probably open our minds to learning from abroad if we're going to move walking and biking modal shares rapidly here in California as well.
Thanks, Chris. The next two questions on Slido are related, so I'm going to take those together
again as well. So it's related to the outcomes of your project, and it's kind of how are you tracking and monitoring the benefits, the successes of your projects, and specifically it's kind of focused on how do you measure the use of those facilities. So can you all talk about kind of how you're looking at measuring the benefits of the work you're doing?
I'll be real quick. We didn't build the trail, so it's up to our jurisdictions. I know that they were required to use the same method that they used in their predictions, and that there's a tool being developed. But I can tell you, when I ride to work, everyone is smiling, people are happy, they say hello, and it just makes a great start of your morning. So that's just anecdotal.
I think that's really important to make sure we capture. I also, being in San Jose, right near or the capital of Silicon Valley, I keep looking for that sort of magical sensor-based data app that's going to, do all of this work for us in a reliable, all the time sort of way. And thus far we haven't seen that happen. We're still hoping, and so if you are an app developer who has this figured out, please let me know. But we are still doing, we just got to get out there, get our volunteers from inside our city hall, as well as from our partners in the community, and go out and count. I'm again going to call out Lola. I'll add John Brazil, who's my colleague in the Department of Transportation, to the list. We just go out and stand on street corners, and we have, ways of recording. We're also recording not only that people are riding their bike or scooting, but we're recording things about whether they're men or women. We're recording whether they're on the sidewalk or in the facility and how that changes before and after, which I think, is something we weren't doing a few years ago. So that's something that we did it midway through project implementation. We're going to do it again next April. And then with this ATP project, we actually did build in that we'll use some of the eco counters that are out there that can give you real feedback all the time. And at least for those locations, make it a lot easier to get ongoing data and kind of norm the behavior as well.
200,000 riderships over the course of 10 years out of that little transit center that I showed you. That means that is more people that can access the Tulare County transit system through Little Wood Lake as they go do their shopping in Visalia, or they connect to a system that takes them to work in the industrial parks in Visalia or Dinuba or Porterville, which has value if you look at the fact that, now you have a labor force that actually is employable because they have a way to get to work. Not everybody has a car, but now we have that opportunity to get people to work, and not to mention the number of people that we get to colleges, Sequoias, through the transit system. Again, I'm proud to serve for my 12th year now on the Tulare County Association of Governments, where we instituted a pass for our COS students at a reasonable cost to them. And so for those that couldn't afford, to get to school, they now have access at a reasonably priced, amount to get to college, and they have an opportunity to go to school. Where it was a big challenge when in the 1980s, I have a sister who had to ride a bus, and if the bus made it to Wood Lake, she got on it and she went to COS. If it didn't, then, she missed out on a day of school. Now they don't have to worry about that. So, those are the types of projects that you have to formulate an opinion on the value. And so talk from the heart. What are the impacts and how have they benefited your communities? But I do want to say before I forget to do this is for those of you in the larger communities, larger cities, don't forget about your little towns in your county. Work with them. Have conversations about what they want to see, and sometimes it's as simple as, what do you want to see? And make it work. But don't forget about the little guys, because I'm telling you, the little guys are a heck of a lot more powerful than you think.
I just really want to briefly mention as far as like the ways that are low cost to measure average traffic. So again, I'm going to reemphasize partnerships. There are organizations like CalWalks who does trainings to learn how to do traffic counts, or to learn how to do measure walking accessibility or and whatnot. And so, there are organizations that exist that are doing that work already. So partnering with them to, and especially on projects that are benefiting the communities that we work in, or that really it's the ones that they're advocating for, that's where you're going to really be able to kind of spread that cost around and work in partnership. And also like that they do a really great job of training, like, just community residents who are already walking or, already there at the crosswalks because they're volunteers and they stop, they're the ones who stop traffic. So I just wanted to reemphasize that because I think that's a really good way. So it's not just, it's the onus is not just on the jurisdictions.
Thank you. So one question that came up just in discussion before the panel was a question about emergency vehicle access and how that impacts on your design. And Jessica, I know that's something you thought about with your project. Do you want to just comment on how that influenced your?
Yeah, sure. I think it's probably relevant for a lot of jurisdictions that they, want to make sure that they're designing safe facilities for people who are walking and biking, and they don't want to impede safety from a fire department perspective or police perspective. So one of the things that we were able to do with the partnership from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, was start out that conversation with our fire department by having the Portland fire chief talk with our fire chiefs. So they set up a discussion with the, chief and assistant chief in Portland and two of our fire chiefs. And I knew that it was all going to be okay when our chief said to me after that conversation, I get it. We are all in the business of public safety. So we didn't just leave it there, though. We did do 4 design workshops with our fire department colleagues to take a look at the different options and how to make sure there's access to fire hydrants, and we could think about the different types of ladders that they have and trucks that they have and how to make sure that they worked in the right context. And then we also did a ride along to see what they feel and see of, kind of going through the streets, what is easy for them, what is difficult for them, et cetera. So we, materials, choice, curvature, all of that, we really got to dialogue about that. But I think it was also important to kind of set the direction right with the idea that, it can be done, we're not against each other, we're all in the business of public safety. So I just encourage kind of early and often, and we're thinking about some of the other lessons from Portland about, maybe just designate some streets, primary emergency access streets. So that was kind of an important part of our internal working within the city.
One of the biggest questions I used to get was, Rudy, how in the world are the trucks going to get through the roundabout? And quite frankly, it was a logical question because a lot of trucks are commercial trucks, but every now and again we have trucks that are carrying bobcats and equipment to fight fires. Like I said, we're right next to Sequoia National Park. But the reality of it is, it really isn't a problem. I know I made fun of engineers and I do it all the time, but these guys know what they're doing. It's just a matter of educating your constituents so that they understand that, number one, is if they do have a concern about these projects that you're building, they should be part of that discussion, even if it's just as simple as setting up a meeting at your local coffee shop. But don't do things by fiat, because if you really want to get buy-in, we're talking about all these projects and the impacts they make on communities, but if you really want to get buy-in, involve the folks in your neighborhoods and get them involved. Get them thinking about these transportation projects, because let me tell you where it makes a difference. It makes a difference on election day. It makes a difference when it comes time to voting for measures that support transportation projects.
All right, I'm seeing a persistent hand here in the audience. You want to ask a question, Dan?
Yes, 2 of the panelists mentioned volunteer counting,
Uh-huh.
and I've never heard anyone suggest volunteers counting cars, and that would be transformative. If we get over that, we count cars by professionals and we count by comped, by volunteers, that would be transformative.
Good comment. All right, I see another hand down here.
Compendium put together. So,
Thanks.
Conducting.
There's a lot of new guidance coming out about how to conduct counts, and including the ATRC recently put out some guidance for the ATP program specifically. So there's lots of good guidance out there. But Dan, great point. Let's not just use volunteer labor to count pedestrians and bicyclists when we spend real money on counting vehicles on our facilities. Any other audience questions, or I'll go back to Slido. You have another question here? Yeah, hang on for the mic so we can get your question online.
Two comments, actually. There's counting sort of in the open on a street or corridor, but you have a very important context that counting is relatively easier, and that's the school. It's really important to get counts going to school. And that's also transformative in two ways. It gets the kids active, if you can succeed in getting the mode shift there, or it also reduces the amount of local traffic volume. So this counting at the school is a cordon count. There also is hardware that you can attach to the kids' bikes, so they're counted automatically as they arrive. Pedestrians too. It's not Big Brother-ish. You can get some buy-in from the school community and let the people that walk in get automatically counted. Palo Alto is an example of something I'd never seen, which is mode shares over 50% on bike to high school. Okay, to high school. Rosie here, safe routes. But that was a concerted effort to turn it around by parents. It wasn't, it didn't happen automatically just because they're near Stanford and they're, highly educated white people. It was because the parents saw the trend dropping in the wrong direction, and they worked diligently to get the bike parking infrastructure and to get everything that was needed to turn the mode around, and it's off the charts. I don't believe that's just a Palo Alto effect. I think that's a community effect. It's replicable.
And to Marcella's point, we need to get extra bonus points when we do counts if they're smiling. All right, let's go to our next Slido question, because non-infrastructure has come up a couple of times, and I think even the audience questions or comments are really tied back to this, the benefit of doing non-infrastructure alongside your infrastructure improvements, and make sure you're coordinating those education encouragement programs as you're building facilities. So any of you want to talk about the benefits or maybe the work you've done in your community on non-infrastructure?
Real quick, in our community, we're one of the few that actually has a working Parks and Recreation department. In conjunction with our school district, we partnered together to put in some minor infrastructure, but while other communities in the county are shutting down their parks and recs, ours is thriving. We've serviced a number of kids, thousands of kids over the last year and a half, and providing basketball, soccer, baseball, swimming. And, that right there has done a couple things. Number one, it has provided a feeder program for our schools, yes, if you're a sports nut like me. But the reality of it is it's given our kids an outlet. So I talked earlier about the reduction in juvenile crime-related statistics. A lot of it is due in part to programs such as ours where, you don't have to pay an arm and a leg to be a part of our Parks and Rec program. But it's all volunteer-based, and I'm proud to tell you that in my community, it is not uncommon to see my city administrator coaching a soccer team or my police chief mowing the lawn out in City Hall to make it work. But in my city, our staff spends just as much hours outside working with our kids in our youth Parks and Rec program as they do in the office doing day-to-day stuff. I am remarkably proud of those people. And that is what has led to a lot of our success. But, that's an example of a non-infrastructure project that has paid dividends to our community.
It's a great example. So we have a really great walk and roll program in about 55 of our San Jose schools, and that it's doing really excellent work, especially around walking to school, walking school buses, and works with our engineering team and grant funds to get infrastructure that's missing in. But I also wanted to point out our Viva Calle Open Streets program, Viva Calle SJ, and Mr. Ed Solis, also in our Parks and Rec department, just like Rudy was mentioning. And so what the team in Parks and Rec has done with Ed's leadership is take a program, first year, 6 miles closed of some pretty big San Jose streets. It was ambitious. They got 30,000 people out the very first year, and now it is packed. We close 6 miles of streets about twice a year. We're getting more than 100,000 people at every single event. So people can no longer say that people in San Jose, they just don't bike, because they do. They really, really do. And they really experience the city so differently. Again, it's like that pace, that eye contact, you notice things that you never did before, and it gets all manner of people across our community seeing parts of the city that they don't usually go to, that aren't in their beaten path, and really appreciating it so differently. So Viva Kai SJ, ping Ed Solis, tell him I sent you.
Okay. All right, I think we've got about 5 more minutes. So the next high vote question is, with the climate crisis here, how can we accelerate mode shift to significantly reduce GHG emissions? I think this is all on our mind with the fires and the power shutdowns and the crazy winds we saw this week. This is a key issue.
Well, I would just say I'm going to be looking at the comments through the polling, because it took me 3 years to change the scripts in my head. So I need to advance that and figure out what is keeping other people. And you need to ask. You need to ask the people that live there and the people in this room.
Other comments on this one?
I think the pace of change, both for infrastructure and non-infrastructure, just we have to figure out how to accelerate it, right? Because we know that our current system is unsustainable and can't continue even over the next 5 years, given the pace of climate change. So I think it's one of the reasons we're so excited to host CTC staff and the commission earlier this year and take staff on a tour of the Quick Build project. We really appreciate them spending the time with us to look at that, because I think, we believe that we're going to be able to put in a better project in hardscape, but we also really shortened the amount of time that it took to do a project versus what would typically be required. And so how do we think, out of the box and really creatively about how to create the type of streets that people don't feel like you have to shut down the road to get out there, but rather you can just feel comfortable on your own streets.
You've hit on a topic that I spent a lot of time, talking about, and that is water. Water is a big issue, not only in California, but specifically our Central Valley. Most people don't realize that we provide 25% of the nation's food supply out of the San Joaquin Valley. That's 800 million metric tons go up and down Highway 99 every year. So we need to address Highway 99 to where it is a safer route and commute, because that's the backbone of our communities in the Central Valley. But, water is a big factor. And so we need to address water infrastructure projects and storage capabilities in California. But, specifically driving up here and hearing everything on the news about all the wildfires, we can talk about projects, but we also need to talk about things like forest management. So if you have a voice and you have an ability to talk to leaders at the state level or the federal level about transportation projects, also take the time to talk about these 2 key points: better forest management and the availability of water infrastructure projects across the state.
I just really, a couple of things, would want to emphasize her point around, really the answer is how do we change, how do we have a social shift of where it's normal to go bike riding? And, given California's diversity and our large immigrant populations is, there's cultural differences in how, riding a bike or walking is perceived. And so how is it that we can get people within their own, their own enclaves, to be able to move outside? So it's really asking the folks, and that's why, I cannot emphasize enough, just making sure the people who live there are at the forefront, because they're the ones who are going to be ultimately, hopefully, reaping the benefits of whatever projects come about. I would also add to this is not just the community's social kind of shifting their perspective, but also, our decision makers, our city staffs, our county staffs, changing their perspective, because oftentimes we continue to perpetuate what we've done in the past. And sprawl development, especially I'm emphasizing in the inland regions where we are building new cities. Because we are a pretty, sparse community, we're building completely new cities. Why? Even though we have infill, we can very well fit in a lot of populations with infill development. It's just because it's what we've done in the past, and changing that, and changing the way we approach land use decisions, and making sure that we're properly placing, not just communities where they should be, but making sure things that shouldn't be near a community that are, worsening our air quality, worsening the overall quality of life of communities, that they're not anywhere near. And when we are bringing those types of facilities in a community, making sure that, there's certain standards that they should be meeting, and we shouldn't just, facilitate, the development of something that's really going to plague the community rather than benefit. So it's a very comprehensive approach. I feel like it's not, one type of decision, obviously, otherwise we probably would have already solved it. But I think especially the having community at the forefront and kind of changing the way we've made land use decisions from the past to, hey, okay, we have to really take this seriously. And across the state of California, because definitely some jurisdictions are much better at it than other jurisdictions. So learning from one each other and really kind of taking that into account.
Fantastic. Well, I think what we've heard today, I think we answered the question about what is transformative, and the answer is it's really complicated. But, we touched on a lot of those intersectional issues, and, I just think housing, climate, water, but it really all comes back to the people and the communities we serve and making sure they're centered. So I just, want to really thank the panel and thank all of you for your very engaging questions. And I'll hand it back to Carl.
Caltrans Acting District 2 Director, Jeannie Ward-Waller, great job as always. Nuggets. As I listen to these amazing panels, I always judge a conference by a simple sentence. Did I learn? And I have learned so much from this morning already. I hope you have as well. And there's always those nuggets, and there are too many to name. But from Rudy, we learned, don't forget small towns. We learned so much from each of them. From Gracia, we learned partnerships. Look broadly within your community for unlikely partnerships. From Jessica, we learned that as we design improvements for safe biking and walking, don't forget the bigger issues around public safety and emergency vehicles. And from Marcella, thank you so much for reminding this 58-year-old that my body mass index may not be going down, but it's not getting bigger. It's stabilizing.
Yeah.
We are going to have a wonderful chance to network over 75 minutes of an extended lunch, which means in 76 minutes, we want you back in here after enjoying food, coming back in for food for thought. But we're going to leave you with a foreshadow of our next amazing panel on new frontiers for advancing equity and justice in active transportation. Tony Dang, are you here? Tony? Tony, come on up. Tony, why don't you give us a one-sentence preview and a really cool announcement as well. We have a mic right here, Tony. Come on up. Stairs are there. Tony Dang, Executive Director of Cal Walks. One-sentence preview, but also, I think just something for us all to shift our minds around and our hearts around when we come back into this room in 74 minutes.
So I'm not going to do one sentence because this topic of equity and justice deserves much more than that. And so in putting together this session with our panelists and in reflecting on my own experiences in this field as a queer person of color, we decided that there's two really important things that we want to accomplish with this panel. One is to recognize that in this transportation policy space, it's really difficult to be a queer person, to be a person of color, and that it can be very alienating, isolating, unwelcoming, and sometimes downright hostile to work in these spaces. So that's one thing that we want to shine a light on. And then two, as we have this hard discussion, it's really critical to center these perspectives that have been either excluded or marginalized, and really center these perspectives in the discussion. And so So as you guys come back, if you self-identify as a Black person, a person of color, an Indigenous person, and feel that your voice has been excluded or marginalized in the past, we really invite you to come sit in the front. We're going to create space for you to occupy, and I really want to thank CTC staff for really helping us to create this really critical space to have this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. We'll see you all in 73 minutes.